Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a silence that hangs over the galaxy. Not the absence of sound, no, for there is never truly silence in the 41st millennium. The void between stars hums with the psychic screams of dying worlds. The warp churns and froths like a wounded ocean, spitting out horrors wherever its tides lap against the shores of reality. A billion battlefields echo with the crack of bolt shells and the wet thud of blades finding flesh. No, this is a different kind of silence. It is the silence of absence, the silence of thrones left empty, the silence that follows a father's last words to his sons, words spoken 10,000 years ago and still echoing through the corridors of time like a prayer that never quite reaches the heavens. The Imperium of man stands at the edge of an abyss so vast that even its name carries the weight of damnation. The Great Rift, that hideous wound in the fabric of reality itself, has torn the galaxy in half. On one side, the light of the Astronomicon still reaches through the darkness, a golden thread stretching from Terra to the furthest reaches of the Imperium Sanctus. On the other side lies the Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, where that light has been swallowed by a maelstrom of nightmares. Entire sectors have gone silent. Worlds that stood for millennia have been consumed by warp storms or overrun by the numberless armies of chaos. Time itself has come unmoored in places, with some planets experiencing centuries in the span of days, while others find themselves frozen in a single, endless moment of terror. And yet, amid all this darkness, something is stirring. Something ancient. Something that has not been felt in 10,000 years. Across the length and breadth of the galaxy, in places hidden and forgotten, in the depths of the warp and the shadowed corridors of the webway, and in tombs sealed since the age of heresy, and in the hearts of stars that have burned since before humanity first looked up at the sky and wondered what lay beyond, the sons of the Emperor are beginning to move. The Primarchs are coming home. Now, I want you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the world around you fall away and picture a galaxy that has known nothing but war for 10,000 years. A galaxy where the greatest heroes of humanity are remembered only as myths, their deeds reduced to scripture and their faces carved in stone by artisans who never knew the warmth of their gaze or the thunder of their voices. A galaxy where the only Primarch most living souls have ever seen is Robute Guilliman, the avenging sun, who even now sits upon his throne in the heart of terror and feels the weight of an empire crushing him day by day. Now imagine that all of that changes. Not slowly, not one by one over the course of centuries, but all at once. Every missing son, every fallen brother, every daemon prince and wandering knight and sleeping giant, all of them returning to a galaxy that has forgotten what it means to have demigods walk among mortal men. That is the story we are going to tell today. Not just who the Primarchs are or where they have been, but what happens when every single one of them finally comes back. What it means for the Imperium, for chaos, and for every living thing in a galaxy that has been holding its breath for 10 millennia. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let the sound of my voice carry you through one of the most staggering scenarios imaginable in the lore of Warhammer 40,000. This is going to be a long journey, and every step of it is worth taking. Think about what that means for the people on the ground. Not the generals and the admirals and the lords of the Imperium, but the ordinary men and women who make up the vast, churning mass of humanity. The hive worker on Armageddon, whose entire life is spent in the shadow of blast furnaces, forging shells for wars she will never see. The guardsman on Chaldea, or what used to be Chaldea, before Abaddon the Despoiler broke that ancient fortress world and plunged the galaxy into darkness. The astropath whose mind is slowly being consumed by the very psychic gift that makes him valuable, who listens to the screams that echo through the warp and tries to find meaning in the madness. The child born on a world in the Imperium Nihilus, who has never seen the light of the Astronomicon and does not even know what it means to be part of an empire, because all she has ever known is the darkness and the things that lurk within it. For these people, the Primarchs are not strategic assets or political figures. They are myths. They are the angels of the Emperor, or the demigods who walked the stars in an age of legend, whose deeds are recounted in hymns and prayers, and the fading pages of books so old that their words have become more symbol than language. For these people, the return of a Primarch is not a political event. It is a miracle. It is proof that the gods have not abandoned them, that somewhere beyond the veil of darkness, there are beings of such power and such purpose that even the forces of chaos cannot ultimately prevail. And imagine their faces when they learn that not just one, not just two, but all of the Primarchs are coming back. The sheer, overwhelming weight of that revelation would reshape the psychic landscape of the galaxy. 1 billion prayers answered at once, 1 trillion souls daring to hope for the first time in their lives. The warp itself would shudder at the magnitude of that collective faith, that collective will, that collective refusal to accept that the darkness is all there is. But that is the true power of the Primarchs, not their strength, not their genius, not their ability to command armies and reshape worlds. Their true power is what they represent. They are the living proof that the Emperor's dream was real, that humanity is destined for something more than mere survival. And in a galaxy that has forgotten how to dream, that is the most powerful weapon of all. Before we can understand what the return of all the Primarchs would mean, well, we need to go back to the very beginning. We need to talk about what the Primarchs actually are, because the truth of their creation is far stranger and far more terrible than most Imperial citizens will ever know. The official histories, the ones taught in scholams and whispered in cathedrals, tell a simple story. The Emperor of mankind, in his infinite wisdom, created 20 sons to lead his armies across the stars. They were generals, warriors, statesmen, and each one crafted to embody a different aspect of the Emperor's own superhuman nature. They were weapons of conquest, tools of unification, the instruments through which humanity would claim its birthright among the stars. But the truth, as always, is more complicated than that. The Primarchs were not simply soldiers. They were experiments. Each one was a unique genetic masterwork, built from the Emperor's own DNA, but modified and enhanced in ways that even the greatest geneticists of the Imperium cannot fully comprehend. Some had sequences deliberately deleted from the base Primarch genome. Others had non-human DNA spliced into their genetic code. The 6th Primarch's genome, for instance, contained canine-like DNA, which might explain the wolf-like mutations that would later plague the Space Wolves and their gene father, Leman Russ. Each Primarch was designed to be a living weapon, yes, but also something more, a key, a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, would give humanity the tools it needed to survive in a galaxy that wanted it dead. The Emperor created 20 of these beings in a secret laboratory beneath the Himalayan mountains of terror, working with technologies and sciences that blurred the line between the physical and the metaphysical. There were whispers, even then, in that the Emperor had made bargains with powers beyond mortal understanding to give his sons their extraordinary abilities. Some say he ventured into the warp itself, bargaining with the very entities that would later become humanity's greatest enemies. Others claim the Primarchs were created using knowledge gleaned from the Aeldari, the ancient alien race whose own gods had been consumed by the birth of Slanesh. Whatever the truth, the result was 20 beings of staggering power, and each one standing between 10 and 12 feet tall, each one capable of feats that made even the mightiest space marines look like children playing at war. But the Chaos Gods were not blind to what the Emperor was doing. Whether through their own machinations or through some flaw in the Emperor's design, they reached out through the warp and scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy. Each one landed on a different world, growing up in radically different conditions. As some were raised in the halls of kings, others in the pits of slaves. Some knew love and wisdom, others knew only cruelty and pain. And when the Emperor finally found them, one by one, during his great crusade to reunite humanity, he discovered that his perfect instruments had been shaped by their experiences in ways he could never have predicted. This is the fundamental tragedy of the Primarchs. They were created to be perfect, but they were raised to be human, and it was their humanity, but their loves and fears and jealousies and hopes that would eventually tear them apart. Half of them would remain loyal to the Emperor during the cataclysmic civil war known as the Horus Heresy. The other half would fall to chaos, seduced by the promises of dark gods who offered them everything the Emperor had denied them. And when the dust settled and the heresy was over, when Horus lay dead and the Emperor sat broken upon the golden throne, the surviving Primarchs scattered. Some died, odd some vanished. Some were transformed into something that could no longer be called human, and the galaxy was left to fend for itself, a ship without a captain, an empire without its kings. For 10,000 years, that is how things have remained. The Imperium has endured through sheer stubbornness and the sacrifice of countless billions, held together by bureaucracy and faith and the dim psychic light of the Emperor's presence on the Golden Throne. The Space Marines, the genetic descendants of the Primarchs, have carried on the fight, each chapter bearing the legacy of its gene father like a sacred burden. But they are not Primarchs. They are echoes of echoes, shadows of shadows. They carry the strength and the skill, but not the vision, not the power that could reshape worlds with a word or turn the tide of a galactic war with a single act of will, until now. 2 Primarchs have already returned to the Imperium, and their reappearance has shaken the foundations of the galaxy in ways that are still being felt across every sector of Imperial space. The first was Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, the Avenging Sun, and arguably the most important single event in Imperial history since the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne. For 10 millennia, Guilliman had lain in stasis upon his homeworld of Macragge, mortally wounded by a poisoned blade wielded by his own brother Fulgrim during the desperate days following the heresy. His body was preserved in a field of frozen time, displayed in the Temple of Correction like a saint in a glass coffin. And for 10,000 years, the people of Ultramar came to gaze upon his frozen features and pray that one day, somehow, he would open his eyes. That day came during the events known as the Gathering Storm. Yes, in the final desperate hours before the galaxy was split in two. The fall of Cadia, that ancient fortress world that had stood as a bulwark against chaos for millennia, sent shockwaves through the Imperium that reached all the way to Macragge. An unlikely alliance formed between the forces of the Imperium and the Inari, a faction of the Ildari devoted to their newly awakened god of the dead. The Archmagos, Belisarius Cawl, as a tech priest who had been working in secret for 10,000 years on the Emperor's own orders, had crafted a suit of armor called the Armor of Fate, and Ivrain, the emissary of the Eldari god Inead, possessed the psychic power to do what no imperial technology alone could achieve. Together, they revived Guilliman. The moment his eyes opened, the moment his first breath in 10 millennia filled his lungs, Io was described by those who witnessed it as something approaching a religious experience. Even warriors locked in mortal combat paused to stare as the Primarch rose. His presence was overwhelming, a psychic weight that pressed down upon every soul within range like the gravity of a star. Here was not just a general returned from the dead. Here was a living piece of the Emperor's own design, a demigod walking among mortals for the first time in an age. But Guilliman's return was not the joyous homecoming that the legends had promised. When he finally reached Terra, when he stood before the Golden Throne and looked upon the desiccated husk of his father, something inside him broke. The Imperium he had helped build was unrecognizable. It had become a theocratic nightmare, a bureaucratic labyrinth ruled by dogma and fear. While the Emperor he had known as a distant but brilliant visionary was now worshipped as a god by trillions who understood nothing of his true vision. Guilliman reportedly wept, or came as close to weeping as a Primarch can, when he realized the full scope of what 10,000 years had done to his father's dream. And yet, he shouldered the burden. He took the title of Lord Commander of the Imperium, becoming the Imperial Regent the living voice of the Emperor. He launched the Indomitus Crusade as a massive military campaign to reclaim the worlds lost to chaos in the wake of the Great Rift's creation. He introduced the Primaris Space Marines, a new generation of enhanced warriors that Belisarius Cawl had been developing in secret for 10,000 years, stronger and more resilient than their predecessors, taller and more heavily armored, built with new organs and new technology that pushed the boundaries of what a Space Marine could be. He fought the Plague Wars against his fallen brother Mortarion in the realm of Ultramar, a grinding conflict that saw entire worlds drowned in disease and corruption. During those wars, something extraordinary happened, something that shook Guilliman to his core. At a moment of desperate need, when the forces of Nurgle threatened to overwhelm the last defenses of Ultramar, a presence spoke through Guilliman, a power of such magnitude that it could only have been the Emperor himself, reaching across the void from the Golden Throne to act through his son. That power banished Mortarion and his demon legions in an instant, sending the Death Lord screaming back to the realm of Nurgle, while the Grandfather of Plagues watched from his manse with a fury that shook the warp. But the experience left Guilliman more troubled than ever. He had felt his father's presence, and it was not the brilliant visionary he remembered. It was something else, something colder, as something vast and alien and terrible. The being on the Golden Throne was still the Emperor, but 10,000 years of suffering, 10,000 years of absorbing the prayers and the pain of 1,000,000,000,000 souls had changed him into something that Guilliman could barely recognize. The realization that his father might have become the very god he never wanted to be haunted Guilliman like nothing else in his long existence. He confronted the demon Primarch Magnus on the surface of Luna, the Emperor's own moon. He defeated Skarbrand, the most violently destructive demon in existence. He restructured the Adeptus Terra, reformed the Imperial military, and personally led campaigns across dozens of sectors. He did everything a single Primarch could do to hold the Imperium together, and it was not enough. It could never be enough. One son, no matter how brilliant, cannot save an empire that spans 1,000,000 worlds. The burden was crushing him, yet the isolation eating away at his resolve. Guilliman was alone in a way that no being in the galaxy could truly understand. He was the only one of his kind, the last of a breed of demigods, surrounded by mortals who worshipped him as a saint and feared him as a tyrant. He needed his brothers, desperately. The second Primarch to return was Lionel Johnson, the first, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, and his awakening was perhaps even more dramatic than Guilliman's. For 10,000 years, the Lion had lain in a hidden chamber deep within the rock, the Dark Angels' mobile fortress monastery. His existence was one of the greatest secrets in the Imperium, known only to the Emperor himself, and to the strange beings called the Watchers in the Dark, who tended to the slumbering Primarch in his hidden sanctum. Not even the Dark Angels themselves knew their Gene-Father lay sleeping within the heart of their own fortress. His awakening came during the Arcs of Omen campaign, or when the forces of chaos, led by the despoiler Abaddon and the demon entity known as Vashtor the Archifani, launched a devastating assault across the galaxy. The Lion awoke not to ceremony and celebration, but to war. He emerged from 10 millennia of sleep, looking older, more weathered, like a knight who had wandered long in the wilderness. He did not carry his famous blade, the Lion Sword, for that weapon had been taken by the enigmatic figure known as Cypher. Instead, he wielded a new blade called Fealty and bore the Emperor's own shield upon his arm. The Lion's return was different from Guilliman's in almost every way. Where Guilliman sought to rebuild and reform, the Lion simply fought. He appeared without fanfare, gathered loyal warriors to his side, and began doing what he had always done best, hunting the enemies of the Emperor with cold, methodical precision. He clashed with the demon Primarch Angron on the warped replica of his lost homeworld Caliban, called Wormwood, in a duel that shook reality itself. He forgave the fallen, those dark angels who had turned traitor during the destruction of Caliban 10,000 years ago, and began the process of reuniting his scattered legion. Where Guilliman looked upon the Imperium and felt despair at what it had become, The lion looked upon it and simply saw work that needed doing. He is a creature of action, not reflection. A hunter, not a philosopher. And in a galaxy drowning in enemies, that is exactly what the Imperium needs. The contrast between the two returned Primarchs is itself a story worth telling. Guilliman had the advantage of preparation. Belisarius Cawl had been working for 10,000 years to build the tools and the armies that would support the Primarch's return. The Inari had provided the psychic power necessary to heal his wounds. Guilliman returned to a galaxy that, while terrifying in its decay, was at least partially prepared to receive him. But the lion had none of that. He woke up alone, in the dark, with no allies and no understanding of the galaxy he had returned to. He had to learn everything from scratch, stumbling through a universe that bore almost no resemblance to the one he remembered. There is a novel called The Lion, Son of the Forest, written by Mike Brooks, that tells the story of the lion's earliest days after his awakening. It paints a picture of a Primarch who is lost in every sense of the word, yet he does not know the language of the modern Imperium. He does not understand its customs or its politics. He does not recognize the Space Marines who bear his legion's name and colors. He is a knight without a kingdom, a warrior without a war, and the loneliness of his situation is almost unbearable. But the lion is nothing if not adaptable. He gathered warriors to his side, both loyal Dark Angels and members of the Fallen, and he began to carve out a place for himself in the new galaxy through the only method he has ever truly understood: the point of a sword. The fact that the lion forgave the Fallen is itself one of the most significant developments in Dark Angels lore in decades. For 10,000 years, the Dark Angels and their successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven, have been obsessed with hunting down the fallen angels, those members of their legion who turned traitor during the destruction of their homeworld of Caliban. The hunt for the fallen was the Dark Angels' deepest shame and their most closely guarded secret, a wound that never healed because they refused to let it. The lion's decision to forgive these ancient traitors and welcome them back into the fold was an act of mercy that would have been unthinkable for any previous Dark Angels leader. It demonstrated that even after 10,000 years of sleep, the lion was capable of growth, of change, of seeing beyond the rigid codes of honor and vengeance that had defined his legion for so long. But even 2 Primarchs are not enough. Not when the forces arrayed against humanity include 4 demon Primarchs with full tabletop models and armies, when the Great Rift continues to vomit forth legions of nightmares, when the tyrannid hive fleets press ever deeper into Imperial space, when the Necrons awaken in their tombs and the Orcs rampage across 1,000 worlds with unstoppable momentum. The Imperium needs all its sons, every last one of them, and somewhere, in the spaces between reality and nightmare, the others are listening. Let us begin with the missing. The loyal sons who did not die during the heresy, but instead vanished into the unknown, leaving behind only legends and the desperate hope of their eventual return. There are 4 of them, and each one carries a story that is equal parts tragedy and promise. Leman Russ, the Wolf King, Primarch of the Space Wolves. Of all the loyal Primarchs, Russ was perhaps the most terrifying in battle and the most fiercely devoted to the Emperor. He was the executioner, the attack dog, the one the Emperor sent when a problem needed to be solved with overwhelming violence and unshakable loyalty. Raised on the ice-covered death world of Fenris by actual wolves before being taken in by the planet's human inhabitants, Russ grew into a figure of raw, primal power. He was a warrior without equal in single combat, a leader who inspired fanatical devotion in his sons, and a man whose capacity for rage was matched only by his capacity for loyalty. After the heresy, Russ was consumed by grief and fury. He had arrived at Terra too late to fight beside the Emperor against Horus. Yet he had found Sanguinius dead, and the Emperor broken, and the knowledge that he had failed to be where he was needed most haunted him like nothing else in his long life. He clashed with Guilliman over the proposed reforms to the Imperium, particularly the Codex Astartes, which would break the legions into smaller chapters. He grew more volatile, more unstable, and then, Roughly 2 centuries after the emperor was placed upon the golden throne, Leman Russ simply disappeared. The legends say he went into the Eye of Terror itself, that vast wound in reality where the forces of chaos make their home. Some say he went searching for a cure for the emperor, seeking the mythical tree of life that could restore his father to full health. Others say he went hunting, leading his most trusted warriors, the lost 13th Company, into the warp to pursue the Thousand Suns and their demon Primarch Magnus, the Space Wolves' most hated enemy. His final words to his legion were a promise. He would return for the Wolf Time, the final battle between order and chaos. It is said that Magnus the Red knows where Russ is, but the Crimson King has never shared that knowledge. Picture Leman Russ returning from the Eye of Terror, not the brash, boisterous warrior who left 10,000 years ago, but something changed, something harder. A being who has spent millennia fighting in a dimension where reality is a suggestion and time is meaningless. His armor would be scarred and battered, patched with materials from 1,000 different kills. His eyes would carry the weight of horrors that even a Primarch was never meant to see. But beneath all that pain and all that rage, the Wolf King's loyalty would burn as bright as ever. He would look upon the Imperium and snarl at what it had become, but he would fight for it all the same, because that is what wolves do. They protect the pack. Consider what Russ would have encountered in the Eye of Terror. That cursed region is not simply a battle zone. It is a wound in reality, a place where the warp bleeds through into the material universe, and the laws of physics are written in a language that mortals were never meant to read. Within its borders, time moves differently. A year in the Eye can be a century in the rest of the galaxy, or a single day, or 1,000 years. The terrain itself is alive, shifting and changing in response to the emotions and desires of those who inhabit it. Demon worlds float like nightmares made solid, each one a reflection of the chaos god that spawned it. On Khorne's worlds, the ground is made of bones and the rivers flow with blood. On Tzeentch's worlds, the very architecture of reality shifts and morphs. Buildings that are solid one moment, becoming impossible geometries the next. On Nurgle's worlds, everything decays and rots, and is reborn in an endless cycle of corruption. On Slaaneish's worlds, every sensation is amplified to the point of madness, pleasure, and pain becoming indistinguishable. Russ has been fighting through all of this for 10,000 years. He has faced greater demons, the most powerful servants of the Chaos Gods. He has dueled champions of the traitor legions, warriors who have been enhanced and corrupted by millennia of service to the dark powers. Yet he has walked paths that no mortal has ever walked and lived, navigated storms of psychic energy that would incinerate lesser beings, and endured deprivations that would drive even a space marine to madness. And through it all, the one thing that has kept him going is the promise he made to his legion, that he would return for the Wolf Time. What if the Wolf Time is now? What if the return of all the Primarchs, the gathering of every son of the Emperor in a single moment of cosmic significance? That is the event that Russ foresaw when he spoke those final words to his legion. The Space Wolves have been waiting for this moment for 10 millennia, building their traditions and their strength around the belief that one day their father would come back and lead them in the final battle. If that day has finally arrived, the sons of Russ would unleash a howl of such primal joy and savage anticipation that it would be heard across the entire segmentum. And when Russ meets his brothers again, when he stands beside Guilliman and the Lion for the first time in 10,000 years, there would be a moment of recognition. These men were not friends in the old days. Russ and the Lion once fought a duel that lasted an entire day, and Russ and Guilliman clashed bitterly over the future of the Imperium. But they are brothers, bound by blood and duty and the unbreakable chain of their father's legacy. And in the face of what the galaxy has become, old grudges would seem very, very small. Then there is Jagatai Khan, the Warhawk, the Great Khan, Primarch of the White Scars. If Russ was the Emperor's executioner, the Khan was his lightning bolt. Raised on the feudal world of Chagoris among horse-riding nomads, reminiscent of the ancient Mongols of Terra, Jagatai Khan was a conqueror without parallel. He valued speed and freedom above all things, and his legion reflected his philosophy. The White Scars were the fastest of all the Space Marine legions, and masters of hit-and-run warfare who struck like a thunderbolt and were gone before the enemy could react. The Khan was one of the most enigmatic of the Primarchs. He kept his own counsel, trusted few, and followed his own path even when it put him at odds with his brothers. During the heresy, he remained loyal to the Emperor, but he fought on his own terms, arriving at Terra late but fighting with a fury that turned the tide at crucial moments. After the heresy, and he continued to lead the White Scars during the Great Scouring, hunting down the traitor forces that had fled into the void. 70 years after the heresy, during a pursuit of Dark Eldar raiders who had attacked the White Scars' homeworld of Mundus Planus, the Khan chased the Xenos into a webway portal and never came back. For 10,000 years, the Khan has been lost in the webway, the labyrinthine dimension that connects points across the galaxy through tunnels of stabilized warp space. The webway is a place of impossible geometry and shifting paths, a dimension built by the ancient Aeldari to travel the stars without braving the horrors of the open warp. It is vast beyond comprehension, and within its depths lurk dangers that would challenge even a Primarch. The Dark Eldar, those sadistic cousins of the Aeldari who inhabit the dark city of Komorrah within the webway, may have captured the Khan. He may still be fighting, racing through endless corridors, in his blade singing as it cuts down anything that stands in his path. Imagine the Khan emerging from a webway gate on some forgotten world at the edge of the Imperium. His armor would be alien, modified with Aeldari technology scavenged from his 10,000-year odyssey through the webway. His blade would carry the essence of 1,000 kills, and his speed, already legendary, would be something beyond comprehension. Honed by millennia of fighting in a dimension where the fastest survive and the slow die screaming. The webway is a realm that few in the Imperium truly understand. Built by the ancient Eldari long before humanity existed, it is a network of tunnels and corridors that runs through the space between the material universe and the warp, a kind of dimensional interstitial that allows faster-than-light travel without the dangers of navigating the open warp, where the Emperor himself had been working on a human version of the webway before the heresy, a project that was destroyed when Magnus breached the psychic wards protecting it. The webway is vast, far larger than the material galaxy it mirrors, and within its depths lie entire civilizations, hidden cities, and threats that have never been catalogued. For 10,000 years, the Khan has been navigating this impossible labyrinth. He has encountered the Dark Eldar, those sadistic raiders who inhabit the dark city of Komorrah deep within the webway, and he has fought them with the same ferocity that he brought to every enemy he ever faced. He has navigated sections of the webway that have been damaged by the birth of Slaanesh, areas where the walls between dimensions are thin and demons seep through the cracks like poison through a cracked vial. He has found remnants of ancient Aeldari civilization, technologies and artifacts that predate humanity by millions of years, and he has learned things about the nature of the galaxy that no Imperial scholar has ever dreamed. The Khan who emerges from the webway would be a being of extraordinary knowledge as well as extraordinary power. He would understand the webway in a way that no human ever has, and that knowledge could be the key to solving one of the Imperium's greatest logistical challenges, the difficulty of faster-than-light travel in a galaxy torn apart by the Great Rift. If the Khan could teach the Imperium to use the webway, or even fragments of it, the strategic implications would be staggering. Armies could be deployed across the galaxy in hours instead of weeks. Supplies could reach besieged worlds instantly. The two halves of the Imperium, currently separated by the impassable Great Rift, could be reunited. The Khan would look upon the Imperium and see a civilization that had forgotten how to move, how to adapt, how to strike fast and disappear before the enemy could respond. He would shake his head at the bureaucracy and the dogma, and then he would do what he has always done. He would ride. Vulcan, the Primarch of the Salamanders, is perhaps the most unique of all the missing sons. He is a perpetual, and one of a rare breed of beings who possess the ability to regenerate from any wound, to come back from the dead, no matter how many times they are killed. This makes Vulcan, in a very real sense, unkillable. He has died and been reborn more times than can be counted, enduring torments that would destroy the sanity of any other being. During the heresy, the traitor, Primarch Conrad Curze, tortured Vulcan to death repeatedly, testing the limits of his perpetual nature with a creativity that would make even the most depraved chaos worshipper flinch. Vulcan was the largest of all the Primarchs physically, a towering figure with ash-black skin and glowing red eyes, raised on the volcanic death world of Nocturne. Despite his fearsome appearance, he was known as one of the most compassionate of the Emperor's sons, a being who valued the lives of ordinary humans and went out of his way to protect them. He was a master craftsman, a forge master, whose weapons and artifacts were works of art as much as instruments of war. His legion, the Salamanders, inherited his compassion and his skill, becoming perhaps the most humane of all the Space Marine chapters. Vulcan disappeared after the events of the War of the Beast in the 32nd Millennium, a massive conflict that saw the Orcs unite under a single warlord of staggering power and threatened terror itself. Vulcan returned during this conflict, fighting alongside the Imperial Fists and other defenders of the Imperium. But he was changed. The endless cycle of death and rebirth had taken a toll on his mind, and his mental state was questioned by those who fought beside him. After the war, he vanished again, leaving behind a trail of 9 artifacts known as the Relics of Vulcan. The Salamanders believe that once all 9 relics are gathered, Vulcan will return to lead them on a great crusade against chaos. As Vulcan's return would be different from the others. He would not come back as a warrior first. He would come back as a builder, a healer, a protector. In a galaxy that has known nothing but destruction for 10,000 years, Vulcan would look at the ruins and see something that could be rebuilt. He would pick up the broken pieces and start forging them into something new, something stronger. And when the time came to fight, was when the enemies of humanity pushed too hard and threatened the innocent, the gentle giant would pick up his hammer and remind the galaxy why even the kindest soul can be the most terrifying thing on the battlefield. Finally, there is Corvus Corax, the Liberator, the Shadowed Lord, Primarch of the Raven Guard. Corax was the master of stealth and asymmetric warfare, a freedom fighter who had led a slave revolt on his homeworld of Deliverance before the Emperor found him. His legion reflected his nature, specializing in covert operations, sabotage, and the kind of surgical strikes that could bring an empire to its knees without a single pitched battle. After the heresy, Corax was consumed by guilt. In his desperation to rebuild the Raven Guard, after the devastating losses of the Drop Site Massacre on Istvan V, he had attempted to accelerate the gene seed implantation process, using a sample of the pure Primarch DNA that the Emperor had used to create his sons. But the sample had been sabotaged by infiltrators from the Alpha Legion, and the result was a generation of Raven Guard aspirants who were transformed into hulking mutant monsters. Corax personally euthanized every one of them, an act that broke something inside him. He locked himself in his tower for a year, and when he emerged, gaunt and haggard, he spoke a single word: nevermore. Then he took a shuttle and set course for the Eye of Terror. In the millennia since, Corax has been hunting the traitor Primarchs in the warp itself, and the warp has changed him. The Shadowed Lord has become something more than a Primarch, something less than human. He has been described as a creature of living darkness and shadow, a being who exists partially outside normal reality. In one account, Corax attacked a Wordbearer's demon world in the Eye of Terror, wreaking such havoc that the daemon Primarch Lorgar himself was forced to intervene. The two fought a brutal duel, and Corax dominated the battle, forcing Lorgar to retreat. As the demon Primarch fled, Corax vowed that he would hunt down and slay every traitor Primarch in the warp. Corvus Corax's return would be terrifying even to the Imperium's allies.
Now, real quick, I just want to step out of the lore for a second and give you my honest take on all of this. Out of every Primarch that could come back, the one I personally want to see the most is Jagatai Khan. And I know I just butchered the name, and it might sound like a weird pick when you have fan favorites like Russ and Sanguinius, but hear me out. The Khan is the one Primarch whose return could genuinely change how the Imperium functions. Not just on the battlefield, but logistically. 10,000 years in the webway means he knows things about faster than light travel that nobody else does. Plus his whole personality, that independence, that refusal to be boxed by anyone's rules, that is exactly the energy the Imperium needs right now. Gullyman is drowning in paperwork and politics, and the Lion is just want to stab things. The Khan would ride in, cut through all the nonsense, and remind everyone that sometimes the best strategy is just to move faster than your problems. But anyway, that's just my take. Let's go back to the video.
A Primarch who has spent 10,000 years in the warp, hunting demons and demon Primarchs, absorbing the energies of that hostile dimension and being transformed by them. He would not look like the man he once was. He would be a shadow given form, and a living darkness that moves with purpose and strikes with the precision of a surgeon's blade. His presence would unsettle even his brothers, for they would see in him what the warp can do to even the mightiest souls. But his loyalty would be undiminished. His hatred for the traitors would burn brighter than ever. And with 10,000 years of hunting experience in the most hostile environment in the galaxy, Corvus Corax would be perhaps the most dangerous single combatant among all the returning Primarchs. Think about what it means that Corax chose the Eye of Terror. He did not run from responsibility. He did not hide from the consequences of his failures. He walked, deliberately, and with full knowledge of what he was doing, into the heart of enemy territory, and declared war on the beings that had caused the heresy. For 10,000 years, where the traitor legions in the Eye of Terror have lived with the knowledge that something was hunting them, something that could appear from the shadows without warning, strike with devastating force, and disappear before they could respond. The Dark Angels hunted the fallen. Corvus Corax hunted the ones who made them fall. His transformation by the warp energies raises profound questions about the nature of the Primarchs themselves. If Corax has become a being of living shadow, what does that say about the genetic potential that the Emperor built into his sons? Were the Primarchs always capable of evolving beyond their original design? Are they, like their father, capable of becoming something more than the sum of their genetic components? These questions would haunt Guilliman and the other brothers when Corax finally steps from the shadows and reveals what 10 millennia in the warp has made him. He might be the most powerful of the returning loyalists, but he would also be the most alien, the most changed, the hardest to accept as a brother rather than a stranger wearing a brother's face. The 4 missing Primarchs represent 4 different aspects of what it means to endure in a hostile universe. Russ endures through rage and will, fighting his way through every obstacle with raw ferocity. The Khan endures through speed and adaptability, outrunning every threat and finding paths where none seem to exist. Mump Vulcan endures through compassion and immortality, dying and being reborn, but never losing the fundamental decency that makes him who he is. And Corax endures through stealth and sacrifice, giving up his own humanity to become the weapon that the Imperium needs him to be. Together, they represent a complete philosophy of survival, and their return would give the Imperium not just more soldiers, but new ways of thinking about the challenges it faces. Now we come to the most painful question. Oh, the dead, the sons of the Emperor who fell during the heresy and whose bodies were laid to rest, or whose deaths were witnessed by countless souls. Can the dead return? In a galaxy where demons walk among mortals and the laws of physics bend to the will of dark gods, the answer is not as simple as it might seem. Sanguinius, the great angel, Primarch of the Blood Angels. Of all the Primarchs, loyal or traitor, Sanguinius is perhaps the most beloved. He was beautiful beyond description, and a golden-winged angel whose presence inspired awe and devotion in all who beheld him. He was kind and noble, a natural leader who combined martial prowess with genuine compassion. He was also cursed, carrying within his gene seed the flaw that would become the Black Rage and the Red Thirst, a genetic defect that causes blood angels to periodically descend into mindless fury, reliving the last moments of their Primarch's life. Sanguinius died during the Siege of Terra, in the throne room of Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. He went to confront the War Master, knowing that he would not survive. Prophetic visions had shown him his death, and he accepted it with the same grace that defined everything about him. Horus tried one last time to seduce his brother to the side of chaos, and when Sanguinius refused, the War Master killed him. The exact details of that final battle are the subject of much debate. But what is known is that Sanguinius inflicted a wound upon Horus, a crack in the War Master's corruption that the Emperor later exploited to deliver the killing blow. Sanguinius did not die in vain. His sacrifice saved the Imperium. His body was recovered and taken to Baal, the Blood Angel's homeworld, where it was laid to rest in the golden sarcophagus. The psychic shockwave of his death echoed through the warp, imprinting itself upon the gene seed of every Blood Angel for all time. Even now, 10,000 years later, Blood Angels in the grip of the Black Rage believe themselves to be Sanguinius in his final hours, reliving his death over and over again. Could Sanguinius return? The lore leaves tantalizing hints. A warp echo of Sanguinius appeared to speak to the Emperor during the final battle aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The Sanguinor, a mysterious golden figure who appears during the Blood Angel's darkest hours, may be a manifestation of Sanguinius's spirit. And in a galaxy where the Aeldari god of the dead has been partially awakened and the boundaries between life and death are more permeable than ever, the resurrection of the great angel is not impossible. It would require extraordinary circumstances, perhaps the combined power of the Emperor and the Aeldari god Iniad, but it could happen. And if it did happen, the effect on the galaxy would be seismic. Sanguinius was the one Primarch who could unite all of his brothers, the one whose charisma and nobility transcended the petty rivalries and grudges that divided the Emperor's sons. His return would be a beacon of hope so powerful that it could literally push back the darkness of the Great Rift. The Blood Angels and all their successor chapters, freed from the weight of their grief, would become something far more than they are now, and the Chaos Gods themselves would tremble, for Sanguinius represents everything they cannot corrupt: selfless sacrifice, a genuine nobility, and a love so pure that it burns like the light of a star. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, Primarch of the Iron Hands. If Sanguinius's death was a tragedy, Ferrus Manus's death was a nightmare. He was the first Primarch to die during the heresy, killed at the drop site massacre on Istvan V, when Horus sprung his trap and revealed the full extent of his treachery. Ferrus Manus was decapitated by his own brother and closest friend, Fulgrim, who used a demon-possessed sword called the Blade of the Layer to strike the killing blow. The death of Ferrus Manus was so traumatic that it shaped the Iron Hands chapter for 10,000 years, driving them to replace their flesh with cybernetics in a desperate attempt to eliminate the weakness that, in their eyes, had killed their father. The official records say Ferrus Manus is dead. His skull was kept as a trophy by Horus himself, displayed in the War Master's throne room aboard the Vengeful Spirit. But there are whispers, persistent rumors that refuse to die, that Ferrus Manus's body was somehow restored on Mars, kept alive through cybernetic augmentation by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Both the Mechanicus and the Iron Hands deny this, but in the Imperium, denial is often the strongest form of confirmation. The return of Ferrus Manus would be a dark miracle, and a Primarch who was killed and brought back through the very cybernetic arts that his sons used to cope with the trauma of his death. There is a poetic cruelty to it, a symmetry that the 41st Millennium seems to demand. Ferrus Manus would return not as the living Primarch he once was, but as something between flesh and machine, a being who embodies the very obsession that consumed his legion. He would look upon the Iron Hands and see what his death had done to them, and the guilt would be devastating, but he would also see opportunity. The Imperium needs builders as much as warriors, and Ferrus Manus was one of the greatest weaponsmiths who ever lived. His forge skill, combined with the knowledge of the Mechanicus, could produce weapons and technologies that would shift the balance of power across the galaxy. And then there is Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian of Terror, the stone-faced champion who fortified the Imperial Palace against the greatest siege in history, who stood beside the Emperor in his darkest hour and carried his broken body from the deck of the Vengeful Spirit to the Golden Throne, who held the Imperium together in the aftermath of the heresy through sheer force of will and unshakable discipline. Rogal Dorn is listed as dead, officially. According to the records, he was killed boarding a Chaos warship during the First Black Crusade. Cut down in the corridors of an enemy vessel while leading a suicidal assault against vastly superior numbers. His hand was recovered by the Imperial fists, the skeletal remains kept in the holiest shrine of the chapter, and each succeeding chapter master has scrimshawed the name of a fallen battle brother upon those ancient bones. But here is the thing about Rogal Dorn's death. There is no body, only a hand. And in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the rule of thumb is brutally simple. No body, no confirmed death. During the War of the Beast, the perpetual Primarch Vulcan spoke of Dorn in the present tense, telling Corland, the last surviving Imperial Fist, that he would speak well of him to Rogal Dorn. This could mean that Vulcan expected to meet Dorn in the afterlife, or it could mean that Vulcan knew Dorn was still alive. There are theories that Dorn faked his death to pursue his own crusade against Chaos, as cutting off his own hand and leaving it as a sign that he had chosen to disappear. Other theories suggest that Dorn was captured by his bitter rival, Perturabo, the Iron Warrior's Primarch, and has been held prisoner in the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years. One particularly intriguing hint comes from the collection of the Necron known as Trazyn the Infinite, who is described as possessing a giant of a man clad in Baroque power armor among his many imprisoned exhibits. If Dorn returned, the effect on the Imperium would be profound. Here is the man who built the defenses of Terror, who held the walls of the Imperial Palace against the combined forces of 9 traitor legions. In an era where the Imperium is besieged on all sides, where the Great Rift has left countless worlds defenseless, Dorn's gift for fortification would be more valuable than ever. He would look upon the galaxy and see a fortress that needs rebuilding, walls that need strengthening, defenses that need shoring up, and he would get to work with the same relentless, methodical determination that defined everything he ever did. Now, let us turn our gaze to the other side of the divide, to the traitor Primarchs, the sons who fell to chaos and were transformed into demon princes, beings of immense power who exist simultaneously in the material universe and the warp. Unlike the loyal Primarchs, the traitor Primarchs have not been idle during the last 10,000 years. They have been waging their own wars, pursuing their own agendas, and serving the dark gods who gave them their terrible power. And in recent years, they have become more active than ever before. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, Daemon Primarch of Tzeentch. Magnus was perhaps the most tragic of all the traitors, a being whose fall was engineered by the very god who would claim him as a servant. Before the heresy, Magnus was the most powerful psyker among the Primarchs, a scholar and a sorcerer who delved deep into the mysteries of the warp in pursuit of knowledge. He warned the Emperor about Horus's treachery by projecting his consciousness across the galaxy through psychic means, but in doing so, he shattered the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's secret webway project on Terra, dooming the project and sealing his own fate. The Emperor sent Leman Russ to bring Magnus to heel, but the burning of Magnus's homeworld of Prospero pushed the Crimson King fully into the arms of Tzeentch, the chaos god of change, sorcery, and manipulation. In the 41st millennium, Magnus is one of the most active of the demon Primarchs. He rules the planet of the sorcerers, a demon world that he transported through ritual sorcery to the location of his lost homeworld. He launched a devastating attack on the Space Wolves' homeworld of Fenris, as exacting revenge for the burning of Prospero. He ambushed Guilliman's crusade fleet on Luna, dueling the returned Primarch before being banished by the combined might of the Grey Knights and the Sisters of Silence. Magnus is the schemer, the plotter, the one who sees the galaxy as a vast chessboard and moves his pieces with the patience of a god and the cunning of a serpent. Mortarion, the Death Lord, demon, Primarch of Nurgle. Once the grim and determined leader of the Death Guard, a legion that prided itself on endurance and resilience, Mortarion fell to the corruption of Nurgle, the chaos god of decay, disease, and despair. It happened during the heresy, when the Death Guard fleet was becalmed in the warp on its way to Terra. Nurgle's plagues ravaged the legion, reducing even the superhuman space marines to writhing, tormented husks. Mortarion, who had always hated sorcery and the warp, was forced to call upon Nurgle for salvation, condemning himself and his entire legion to an eternity of service to the plague god. In the current era, Mortarion has been one of the most aggressive of the Daemon Primarchs. He led the plague wars against Guilliman in the realm of Ultramar, a devastating campaign that saw entire worlds drowned in disease and corruption. He was eventually banished by Guilliman during the events of the novel Godblight, or when the Emperor himself may have briefly acted through his son to strike down the Death Lord. But Mortarion cannot be permanently killed. As a demon prince, he exists as much in the warp as in the material universe, and banishment is merely a temporary setback. He will return, as he always does, bringing with him the stench of decay and the promise of oblivion. Angron, the Red Angel, demon Primarch of Khorne. Of all the traitor Primarchs, Angron is perhaps the most pitiable. Before the heresy, he was a slave gladiator on the world of Nuceria, forced to fight in the bloody pits for the amusement of his masters. The tech priests of Nuceria had implanted devices called the Butcher's Nails into his brain, crude neural implants that amplified his aggression while suppressing every other emotion. By the time the Emperor found him, Angron was already a broken being, a creature of rage and pain who knew nothing but violence. But the Emperor could have saved Angron's fellow gladiators. He could have helped them overthrow their masters and win their freedom. Instead, he simply took Angron, teleporting him away from the battlefield while his brothers and sisters in arms were slaughtered. Angron never forgave the Emperor for this, and his bitterness, combined with the constant agony of the Butcher's Nails, made him easy prey for Khorne, the blood god, one who offered him the only thing Angron had ever truly wanted, an end to pain, replaced by an eternity of glorious slaughter. Angron was transformed into a demon prince during the heresy itself, his ascension forced upon him by his brother Lorgar in a terrible ritual that saved his life but damned his soul. In the current era, Angron has erupted from the warp multiple times, each appearance a cataclysm of violence that depopulates entire systems. He led a massive campaign against the Imperium during the Arcs of Omen, clashing with the newly awakened Lionel Johnson in a duel of Primarchs that shook the foundations of reality. Angron cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. He is rage incarnate, a weapon of the blood god pointed at whatever target Khorne desires. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, demon Primarch of Slaanesh. The most recent of the Daemon Primarchs to fully return to the galactic stage. Of Fulgrim and his Emperor's children received a complete overhaul in 2025, with new models, a standalone codex, and the first plastic Fulgrim Demon Prince model in the history of the game. Fulgrim's fall is one of the most disturbing stories in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. He was once the most elegant and charismatic of the Primarchs, a perfectionist who sought to excel in everything he did. But his pursuit of perfection led him to pick up a demon-possessed blade called the Blade of the Lair, and from that moment, his descent into corruption was inevitable. Fulgrim killed his own brother and closest friend, Ferrus Manus, during the Dropsite massacre, decapitating him with the demon sword. The horror of what he had done initially drove Fulgrim to despair, but the daemon within the blade took advantage of his weakness, possessing his body. Eventually, for Fulgrim wrestled control back from the demon, but by then he had embraced the path of excess offered by Slaanesh. Before the heresy ended, he had been transformed into a four-armed serpentine daemon prince, a creature of otherworldly beauty and unspeakable depravity. Fulgrim's return to the tabletop as a full army with his own codex represents one of the most significant moments in recent Warhammer 40,000 history. In all four of the cult Chaos armies now have their own codexes and demon Primarch models: Magnus for the Thousand Sons, Mortarion for the Death Guard, Angron for the World Eaters, and now Fulgrim for the Emperor's Children. The forces of Chaos have never been more organized, more powerful, or more dangerous. And then there are the other two demon Primarchs who lurk in the shadows, waiting for their moment. Lorgar Aurelian, the bearer of the Word, Primarch of the Word Bearers. Lorgar was the architect of the heresy, the first of the Primarchs to fall to Chaos, and the one who masterminded the corruption of Horus. He is a demon prince of Chaos undivided, devoted not to a single god, but to the pantheon of Chaos as a whole. For millennia, he has sat upon his demon world of Sikaris, meditating on the nature of the divine, gathering his strength for a purpose that only he understands. Corvus Corax once fought Lorgar in the Eye of Terror and forced him to retreat, proving that even in his demon form, the Word-Bearer is not invincible. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, the bitter rival of Rogel Dawn, Perturabo was elevated to Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided after the events of the Iron Cage, a trap he set for Dawn that nearly destroyed the Imperial Fists. Perturabo is a master of siege warfare, a builder of fortresses and destroyer of walls, and his rivalry with Dawn defined both of their legacies. He has been relatively quiet in recent years, his last major action being the War of Rust and Ruin against Mortarion's forces, a conflict between two demon Primarchs that demonstrated just how fractious the forces of Chaos truly are. Even in service to the Dark Gods, the traitor Primarchs cannot stop fighting each other. But Perturabo remains a threat of staggering proportions. He is a genius of siege warfare, a mind that can design fortifications so complex that they would take mortal engineers years to comprehend, and siege engines so devastating that they could crack open a planet. If he bestirred himself to full action, the Iron Warriors could become one of the most formidable conventional military forces in the galaxy. There is one more thing that must be said about the demon Primarchs before we move on. They cannot be killed, not permanently. As demon princes, then they exist simultaneously in the material universe and the warp. When their physical forms are destroyed, they are simply banished back to the warp, where they reform over time and eventually return. This is both their greatest strength and their greatest curse. They are immortal, but they are also eternally bound to the Chaos Gods who elevated them. They can never rest, never change, never choose a different path. They are prisoners of their own power, are trapped in a cycle of war and corruption that will never end. This is the fundamental asymmetry of the conflict between loyal and traitor Primarchs. The loyal sons can die. They can fall in battle, and their deaths would be permanent and devastating. The demon Primarchs cannot die, but they can never truly win either. They are extensions of the Chaos God's will, tools rather than agents, weapons rather than warriors. For all their power, they have lost the one thing that makes the loyal Primarchs truly dangerous, the ability to choose. Now imagine it. All of them, every Primarch, returning at once, the loyal sons first. Guilliman, already working himself to the bone trying to hold the Imperium together, receives word that his brothers have been found. Not one or two, but all of them. Leman Russ, emerging from the Eye of Terror with a warband of grizzled veterans who have spent 10 millennia fighting in the heart of chaos. Jaghatai Khan, bursting from a webway gate at the head of an army of warriors mounted on vehicles that blend Imperial and Eldari technology. Vulcan, striding out of the flames of a volcanic forge world, his hammer ringing against an anvil as he crafts weapons for the war to come. Corvus Corax, coalescing from the shadows like a nightmare given purpose, his form flickering between solid and insubstantial. And the dead, Sanguinius, somehow restored, his golden wings spreading wide as he descends from the heavens, a being of such blinding purity that even the daemons recoil from his light. Ferrus Manus, rebuilt and reforged, his silver hands gleaming with new purpose, the sound of his hammer ringing across the forges of Mars. Rogal Dorn, freed from whatever prison has held him, his stone-cold gaze surveying the ruins of the Imperium he fought to protect, already planning the fortifications that will hold back the darkness. Yet the first reunion would be a moment of such emotional weight that it would shake the foundations of the Imperium itself. 9 loyal Primarchs, standing together for the first time since the days of the Great Crusade. Each one changed by the millennia that have passed, each one carrying the scars of their own private wars, but united by a bond that transcends time and distance and even death itself. The bond of brotherhood forged in the fires of their father's ambition. Guilliman would be the first to speak, because Guilliman is always the first to speak. He would lay out the strategic situation with the same clinical precision that has made him the greatest administrator the Imperium has ever known. The Great Rift, the demon incursions, the Tyrannid hive fleets, the Necron awakenings, the Orc empires, the sheer, staggering scale of the threats facing humanity. And for the first time in 10,000 years, there would be enough Primarchs in the room to actually do something about it. The Lion would listen in silence, his arms crossed, his hooded eyes missing nothing. He would not speak until he had something worth saying, and when he did, it would be about the enemy, specifically about killing the enemy. The Lion is not interested in politics or governance. He is interested in the hunt, and the galaxy has provided him with more prey than he could ever ask for. Russ would be the loud one, slamming his fist on the table, demanding action, arguing with Guilliman about tactics and strategy the way they always did in the old days. But there would be a new edge to his voice, a hardness that was not there before. 10,000 years in the Eye of Terror have changed the Wolf King in ways that even his brothers cannot fully understand. The Khan would sit apart, watching his brothers with the quiet intensity of a predator studying its hunting grounds. He would not commit to any plan until he had seen the full picture, and when he did commit, it would be with the speed and decisiveness that made him the greatest cavalry commander in the history of warfare. Vulcan would be the peacemaker, as he always was, the gentle giant who could calm Russ's rage with a word, who could draw the Lion out of his silence with a well-placed jest, who could remind Guilliman that there was more to ruling than efficiency and productivity. And Vulcan would look at his brothers and see not generals or weapons, but family, and he would remind them, in his quiet way, that they were fighting not just for an empire, but for each other. Corax would be the unsettling one, the Primarch who has spent so long in the warp that he is no longer entirely of this world. His brothers would feel uneasy in his presence, sensing the darkness that clings to him like a second skin, but they would also recognize the power he has gained, the ability to move through shadows and strike from places that should not exist. Corax would be the blade in the dark, the weapon that the enemy never sees coming. Sanguinius, if he returned, would be the heart of the group, the one who makes the others remember why they fight. His presence alone would be enough to reignite the hope that has been slowly dying in the hearts of the loyal Primarchs. Guilliman would straighten his spine. Russ would stop snarling. The Lion would lower his hood. The Khan would smile. Vulcan would laugh. Even Corax, the shadow-given form, would step into the light to embrace his golden brother, because Sanguinius was always the best of them, the one they all loved, the one whose death broke something in the soul of the Imperium that has never been repaired. Ferrus Manus would be the pragmatist, the one who looks at the situation and immediately starts calculating what can be built, what can be improved, what can be optimized. His relationship with his sons, the Iron Hands, would be complicated, for they have built an entire culture around the trauma of his death. But Ferrus was always a practical man, and he would waste no time on sentimentality. The Imperium needs weapons. He would make them. Dawn would be the foundation, the rock upon which everything else is built. He would say little, but what he said would carry the weight of absolute conviction. The Imperium needs walls. He would build them. The enemies of humanity need to be stopped. He would stop them. And woe to any traitor who dared assault a fortress that Rogel Dawn had designed, for the Praetorian of Terror does not build walls that fall. The emotional reality of this reunion cannot be overstated. These are beings who have not seen each other in 10,000 years. Some of them left on bitter terms. Some of them carry guilt that would break the mind of any mortal, as some of them have been through experiences so terrible that they cannot find the words to describe them. And yet when they stand together, when they look into each other's eyes and see the reflection of their father's design, something happens. Something that transcends strategy and politics and the cold calculations of war. They remember who they are. Not Primarchs, not generals, not weapons. They are brothers, sons of the same father, born from the same dream, shaped by the same purpose. But they have been apart for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to be whole, to be part of something greater than themselves. And in the moment of reunion, when the weight of 10,000 years falls away and they are simply brothers standing together against the darkness, they would rediscover something that the galaxy has almost completely lost: the power of unity, the strength that comes not from individual excellence, but from shared purpose. The knowledge that you are not alone, that somewhere in the vast emptiness of the void, there is someone who understands you, who shares your burden, who will stand beside you when the final darkness comes. That is what the Imperium has been missing. Not more soldiers, not better weapons, not stronger fortifications. It has been missing the thing that held it together in the first place, the bond between brothers, the unity of purpose that turned 20 disparate individuals into the most formidable force the galaxy has ever seen. But the loyal Primarchs' reunion would be only half the story. Across the galaxy, in the Eye of Terror and on 1,000 demon worlds, the traitor Primarchs would feel the shift in the balance of power. The warp itself would tremble as the combined psychic presence of 9 loyal Primarchs blazed like a constellation of new stars. And the demon Primarchs would respond. Magnus would be the first to act, as he always is. But the Crimson King would reach out through the warp with his vast psychic senses, probing the defenses of his brothers, testing their resolve, looking for weaknesses to exploit. He would begin weaving schemes within schemes, plans within plans, the kind of labyrinthine plots that only a mind touched by Tzeentch could conceive. Mortarion would begin preparing his plague fleets, sending waves of corruption ahead of his advance, softening worlds for conquest. The Death Lord knows that he cannot defeat all of his brothers in open combat, but he does not need to. He just needs to outlast them. Nurgle is patient, and Mortarion has inherited his patron's gift for endurance. He would launch a war of attrition so vast and so grinding that even the combined might of the loyal Primarchs would struggle to contain it. Angron would do what Angron always does. He would rage. Yet the Red Angel would erupt from the warp at the head of a host of world eaters, so vast that it would darken the stars, and he would hurl himself at the nearest Primarch with the fury of a being who has known nothing but pain for his entire existence. Angron does not scheme or plan, he simply destroys. And in a galaxy where the loyal Primarchs are trying to coordinate a complex strategic response, a berserker rampage of sufficient scale can be devastatingly effective. A Fulgrim would strike at the weakest point, as his patron Slaanesh demands. The Phoenician would seek out the Primarch who is most vulnerable, most isolated, and most susceptible to the lure of perfection. He would offer them everything they desire, whisper promises of power and pleasure, and the fulfillment of every secret dream. And if that failed, he would simply kill them with the casual elegance that has made him one of the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy. Lorgar would emerge from his meditation at last, his power swollen to staggering proportions after millennia of communion with the dark gods. The bearer of the word would take to the battlefield with the conviction of a true believer, his voice carrying the power of chaos undivided, his words capable of breaking the will of even the most stalwart defenders. Lorgar was always the weakest of the Primarchs in combat, but he is not the same being he was 10,000 years ago. On Earth, the warp has remade him in its image, and the father of the Horus heresy is more dangerous now than he has ever been. Perturabo would finally have what he has wanted for 10,000 years, a chance to face Rogal Dorn again. The Lord of Iron would build fortresses of such ingenious brutality that even Dorn would be challenged to breach them. And within those fortresses, he would set traps so cunning and so deadly that entire armies would be consumed before they even reached the walls. The rivalry between Dorn and Perturabo would reach its ultimate expression, a clash of siege warfare philosophies that would reshape the very worlds they fought upon. The galaxy would become a chessboard of unimaginable complexity, with 18 Primarchs moving their pieces across 1 billion worlds. Every battle would be a confrontation between demigods. Every strategy would be a masterwork of tactical genius. Every clash of arms would shake the foundations of reality itself. And the other factions of the galaxy would watch in horror and fascination as the Primarchs fought their war. The Aeldari, who remember when the Primarchs walked the galaxy during the Great Crusade, would recognize the signs of a new age dawning, an age that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. The Necrons, those ancient machine beings who were old when the Emperor was young, would stir in their tombs, recognizing in the Primarchs a threat that even their millennia-spanning intellects cannot easily counter. The Tyranids, those vast alien hive fleets consuming everything in their path, would find themselves facing enemies who can match their boundless numbers with equally boundless power. And the Orcs, those warlike Xenos who live for nothing but conflict, would howl with delight at the prospect of fighting foes worthy of their attention, as unleashing massive, bellowing war cries that could be heard across entire star systems as they prepared for the greatest conflict the galaxy has ever known. The Tau Empire, that young and ambitious Xenos civilization on the eastern fringe, would watch the return of the Primarchs with a mixture of academic fascination and existential terror. The Tau have never truly understood the scale of the Imperium or the nature of the threats it faces. They have fought space marines and won tactical victories, but they have never faced a Primarch. The return of 18 of these beings would force the Tau to recalculate every strategic assumption they have ever made. Their diplomatic corps would work overtime, trying to determine whether the returning Primarchs represent an opportunity for alliance or an escalation of hostility. But the more pragmatic among the Tau leadership would recognize that a galaxy with 18 active Primarchs is a galaxy in which the Tau Empire's survival becomes even more precarious than it already is. Even the warp itself would be transformed by the return of all the Primarchs. The Primarchs are not merely physical beings. They are psychic constructs as much as they are genetic ones, each one carrying a fragment of the Emperor's own psychic essence within their soul. 9 loyal Primarchs, gathered together, would create a combined psychic presence that could rival the Astronomicon itself. The warp storms that currently ravage the galaxy might diminish in their presence. The demons that pour through the Great Rift might find their connection to the material universe weakened. The chaos gods themselves might find their grip on reality loosened, not enough to defeat them, but enough to force them onto the defensive for the first time in 10 millennia. And this psychic aspect of the Primarch's return is crucial and often overlooked. The Emperor created his sons using a process that combined genetic engineering with psychic manipulation, blending science and sorcery in ways that even the most learned tech priests cannot fully understand. Each Primarch carries within them a piece of the Emperor's soul, a shard of his vast psychic power that was embedded in their being at the moment of creation. And this is why the Primarchs inspire such devotion in those around them. This is why their presence on a battlefield can turn the tide of a war. They are not just warriors. They are beacons, psychic lighthouses that push back the darkness of the warp and strengthen the resolve of every human soul within their influence. 9 such beacons, blazing together, would create a psychic effect of staggering magnitude. The warp storms that have terrorized the Imperium would recoil from their combined light. Yet the demons that haunt the shadows between worlds would find themselves weakened, diminished, driven back into the depths of the immaterium. And the Great Rift itself, that vast wound in reality that has divided the galaxy for years, might begin to heal. Not quickly, not completely, but enough to give the Imperium the breathing room it so desperately needs. On the traitor side, the demon Primarchs would feel the psychic weight of their brothers' reunion like a physical blow. But the warp does not forget. And the bonds between the Primarchs, forged by the Emperor's own hand, transcend the petty divisions of loyalty and treachery. Magnus would sense Russ's return before the Wolf King even left the Eye of Terror, the ancient rivalry between them resonating through the warp like a struck bell. Mortarion would feel Guilliman's presence growing stronger, accompanied by the presences of other brothers. And the Deathlord's bitterness would curdle into something approaching fear. Angron would not feel fear, because Angron is incapable of fear, but even the Red Angel would sense the shift in the balance of power and respond with an escalation of violence that would make his previous rampages look like skirmishes. The Chaos Gods themselves would be forced to react. For 10,000 years, they have held the advantage. Their demon Primarchs are immortal. Their forces are limitless. Their realm, up the warp, is growing stronger as the faith and desperation of the galaxy's mortal inhabitants feeds the very nightmares that torment them. But the return of all the loyal Primarchs would represent a threat that even the ruinous powers cannot easily counter. The four gods would be forced into an alliance of convenience, pooling their resources and directing their servants to coordinate in ways that they normally would never consider. Horn would stay his hand from attacking Slanesh, and Nurgle would cease his war with Tzeentch. For the first time since the heresy, the forces of chaos would be united by something other than Abaddon's iron will, genuine, existential fear. But the true significance of all the Primarchs returning goes beyond mere military power. It would be a spiritual transformation, a shift in the very nature of the Imperium and its relationship with the divine. For 10,000 years, yet the Emperor has been worshipped as a god by trillions of souls who believe that their prayers sustain him upon the golden throne. The ecclesiarchy, the imperial church, has built an entire civilization upon this foundation of faith, and Guilliman has been struggling with this reality ever since his return. The Emperor never wanted to be worshipped. He rejected religion as a source of ignorance and superstition, and yet, in the 41st millennium, a faith in the Emperor is arguably the single most powerful force holding the Imperium together. The return of all the Primarchs would force this contradiction into the open. Here would be the Emperor's sons, living proof that the Primarchs were not gods but men, albeit men of extraordinary power. Some of them, like Lorgar, would represent the very corrupting influence of religion that the Emperor feared. Others, like Guilliman, would actively push back against the worship of the Emperor as a deity. The tension between faith and reason, between the ecclesiarchy and the Primarchs, would become the defining internal conflict of the new Imperium. And then there is the question that underlies everything, the question that no one dares to ask, but everyone is thinking. If all the Primarchs have returned, what does that mean for the Emperor himself? Consider this. The Emperor created the Primarchs for a purpose. Now they were tools, weapons, instruments of his grand design for humanity. When they were scattered by the Chaos Gods, that design was disrupted. When half of them fell to chaos, it was shattered. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has sat upon the Golden Throne, a corpse sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers a day. His psychic might the only thing keeping the webway rift beneath the throne from swallowing terror and the entire Sol system. He cannot die, because if he dies, humanity dies with him. And he cannot live, because the throne is breaking, its ancient technology failing piece by piece, and no one in the Imperium knows how to repair it. But what if the return of the Primarchs is not a random event? What if it is the final stage of the Emperor's plan? A plan so vast and so complex that even 10,000 years of apparent death was part of the design. What if the Emperor has been working, slowly, imperceptibly, from his place upon the throne, guiding events with the last embers of his psychic power, bringing his sons back together for one final purpose? There are hints. During the Plague Wars, something possessed Guilliman briefly, something of immense power that may have been the Emperor himself. That power banished Mortarion and his demon legions in an instant, demonstrating capabilities that Guilliman alone does not possess. The Emperor's psychic presence has been growing stronger in recent millennia, manifesting in events like the resurrection of the living saints and the increased power of Imperial psykers. And the creation of the Great Rift, while catastrophic, has also had the effect of strengthening the barrier between the warp and real space in certain areas, creating what some scholars have called the Emperor's Last Wall. Imagine a scenario in which all the Primarchs, loyal and traitor alike, are drawn back to Terra, not by choice, but by the irresistible pull of their father's will. A summons that reaches across the galaxy and into the warp itself, a psychic call so powerful that not even demon Primarchs can resist it. They would come, all of them, converging on the throne world from every corner of the galaxy, dragging their armies behind them. The largest gathering of superhuman power since the Great Crusade. And at the center of it all, the Emperor, still sitting upon the golden throne, still dying by inches. He's still burning with a psychic fire that illuminates the entire galaxy. But now, with all his sons around him, something might change. The Primarchs were created from his DNA. They carry pieces of his power within them. Together, they represent the sum total of his genetic legacy, the full expression of his design. And if that design was always meant to be assembled, if the Primarchs were always meant to come together at the moment of greatest need, then perhaps their reunion is the key that unlocks whatever final gambit the Emperor has been planning for 10,000 years. Some theories suggest that the Emperor intended to transfer his consciousness into a new body, one built from the combined genetic material of all 20 Primarchs. Others propose that the Primarchs, united, could channel enough psychic energy to repair the Golden Throne or close the webway rift beneath it. Still others believe that the Emperor's plan was never about the throne at all, but about the evolution of humanity itself, a psychic ascension that would transform the entire species into something new, something that no longer needs the Emperor or the Primarchs or the Imperium at all. Whatever the truth, the return of all the Primarchs would mark the end of the status quo that has defined Warhammer 40,000 for decades. As the galaxy would no longer be a static setting frozen at 5 minutes to midnight. It would be a story in motion, racing toward a conclusion that no one can predict. The Primarchs, united or divided, would force a reckoning that has been postponed for 10,000 years. And in that reckoning, the fate of every living thing in the galaxy would hang in the balance. But the personal confrontations between returning brothers would be among the most emotionally charged moments in the entire history of the setting. Consider the reunion of Guilliman and the Lion, two Primarchs who are already back, but who carry 10,000 years of divergent experience between them. Guilliman has been awake for only a few years, but in that time he has shouldered the burden of an entire empire. He has seen the Imperium at its worst. Al has fought against the crushing bureaucracy and blind fanaticism that have turned his father's dream into a nightmare. The Lion, by contrast, was asleep for the entire 10,000 years. He went to sleep in a galaxy where the Imperium was still young, and woke up in a galaxy where it was ancient and crumbling. The two Primarchs represent fundamentally different approaches to the crisis. Guilliman, the reformer, the administrator, the one who tries to fix the system from within. The Lion, the warrior, the hunter, the one who simply cuts through problems with his blade. Their relationship in the old days was complicated. They had worked together during the heresy, forming the triumvirate of Imperium Secundus alongside Sanguinius, but there had always been tension between them. Guilliman was the planner, the builder, the one who wanted to create something lasting. The Lion was the soldier, the one who saw every problem as a target to be eliminated. Now, thrown together in a galaxy that is falling apart, they would need to find a way to work together that honors both their strengths. The Imperium needs both the sword and the ledger, both the warrior and the administrator. Finding the balance between them would be one of the great challenges of the New Age. The meeting of Leman Russ and the Lion would be something else entirely. These two Primarchs have a history of conflict that goes back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade. Their famous duel on the world of Dulan, which lasted an entire day and ended with Russ laughing and the Lion punching him in the face, is one of the most well-known stories in Imperial history. They are opposites in almost every way. Russ is loud, brash, and confrontational, while the Lion is quiet, secretive, and calculating. They have competed with each other, insulted each other, and fought each other. But beneath all of that, there is a grudging respect that neither of them would ever admit to. A reunion between Russ and the Lion, after 10,000 years of separation, would be a moment of extraordinary emotional complexity. Russ has been through the Eye of Terror, fighting horrors that would break lesser beings. The Lion has been asleep, preserved in a state of perfect innocence while the galaxy burned around him. When they face each other again, they would see in their brother a reflection of their own choices. Russ chose to act, to fight, to throw himself into the darkest hell imaginable. The Lion was denied that choice, sleeping through the greatest crisis in human history. The guilt and the anger and the relief of reunion would collide in an explosion of emotion that even Primarchs cannot easily contain. And then there are the meetings between brothers who were once the closest of friends, and now standing on opposite sides of an unbreakable divide. Guilliman and Mortarion, who fought each other during the Plague Wars, brothers who once respected each other's determination and endurance, now enemies separated by the gulf of 10,000 years of corruption. Guilliman saw what Mortarion had become, a twisted servant of Nurgle, and it filled him with a grief that went beyond anger. Mortarion, for his part, and sees Guilliman as everything he hates about the Imperium, a willing servant of a false emperor, a being who has traded freedom for obedience. Russ and Magnus, the most bitter of all rivalries. It was Russ who led the assault on Magnus's homeworld of Prospero, burning the planet and destroying the Thousand Suns' great libraries in an act of destruction that Magnus has never forgiven. Whether Russ was right to do it, whether the Emperor's orders were for Magnus' arrest or his destruction, is a debate that has raged for 10,000 years. If Russ and Magnus were to face each other again, it would not be a battle of arms alone, but a battle of philosophies. The warrior versus the scholar, instinct versus intellect, fury versus cunning. Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, if both returned, would represent perhaps the most painful confrontation of all. They were the closest of friends before the heresy, as brothers who genuinely loved each other and collaborated on projects that were as much art as warfare. Fulgrim killed Ferrus with his own hands, decapitating his best friend with a demon-possessed sword, and the horror of that act haunts both of them to this day. Even in his corrupted state, Fulgrim reportedly expressed grief for what he had done. If Ferrus were to return, the meeting between these two former friends would be a moment of devastating emotional power, a confrontation that goes beyond grudges and strategies to the very heart of what the heresy cost them all. Dawn and Perturabo, the eternal rivals, would finally settle their score. Their competition during the Great Crusade and the heresy defined both of their legacies. Dawn the Builder, Perturabo the Breaker. The iron cage, the trap that Perturabo set for Dawn, nearly destroyed the Imperial fists and drove Dawn to the brink of madness. If these two met again, the battle between them would not be decided by swords or guns, but by walls and siege engines, fortifications and countermeasures, a contest of architectural genius that would reshape the very worlds they fought upon. And this time, there would be no retreat. This time, the rivalry would end one way or another. The galaxy transformed by the return of all the Primarchs would be unrecognizable. The Imperium, currently a decaying empire held together by duct tape and prayers, would become something new, not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, but definitively different. The Primarchs are not saviors, they are catalysts. Their presence accelerates change, forcing everything around them to evolve or be destroyed. Militarily, the Imperium would become the most formidable fighting force the galaxy has ever seen. 9 Primarchs, each one commanding armies that number in the billions. Each one a strategic genius whose tactical acumen makes the greatest mortal commanders look like amateurs. The Indomitus Crusade, currently a sprawling, disorganized effort to reclaim lost worlds, would become a precision instrument of reconquest, each front commanded by a Primarch whose abilities are perfectly suited to the challenge at hand. Guilliman would coordinate the overall strategy from Terra. Dawn would fortify the reclaimed worlds against counterattack. The Khan would lead the rapid response forces, striking deep behind enemy lines. Russ would serve as the tip of the spear, breaking through the enemy's strongest positions. Corax would conduct special operations, eliminating key targets and disrupting enemy communications. Vulcan would rebuild the shattered industrial base of the Imperium, forging new weapons and technologies. The Lion would hunt down the most dangerous individual threats, the demon princes and warlords and alien leaders whose removal would collapse entire campaigns. Sanguinius would serve as the heart of the Imperium's morale, his presence alone enough to inspire billions of soldiers to fight beyond their limits. Ferrus Manus would revolutionize the Imperium's military technology, working with the Mechanicus to produce weapons and vehicles that could match anything the enemy could field. The traitor Primarchs, meanwhile, would find themselves in a position they have not experienced in 10,000 years, disadvantaged. For the first time since the heresy, the forces of chaos would be outnumbered at the strategic level by opponents who can match them in power and exceed them in coordination. The demon Primarchs are formidable individually, but they have never been able to work together effectively. The Chaos Gods are rivals as much as allies, and their servants reflect this dysfunction. Magnus plots against Mortarion, who undermines Angron, who cares nothing for anyone but Khorne, who seeks to destroy everything regardless of strategic value. Fulgrim pursues his own aesthetic obsessions. Lorgar meditates. Perturabo schemes. They are a collection of individuals, not a team. And against 9 Primarchs who, despite their own rivalries and differences, can actually cooperate when the stakes are high enough, the traitors would find themselves on the defensive for the first time in millennia. Politically, the return of all the Primarchs would trigger a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions. Who rules the Imperium? Currently, Guilliman serves as Imperial Regent, the living voice of the Emperor. But the return of his brothers would challenge that authority. The Lion, as the Primarch of the First Legion, might claim seniority. Russ might reject the entire concept of centralized authority, whilst preferring to lead his own forces independently. Dawn might insist on rebuilding the command structure from scratch, creating a more robust system of governance. The Khan might simply refuse to participate in any political system at all, preferring the freedom of the open void. The ecclesiarchy would face an existential threat. The Primarchs, living proof that the Emperor was a man of science rather than a god, would undermine the theological foundations upon which the Imperial Church is built. And some Primarchs, like Guilliman, would actively oppose the worship of the Emperor. Others, ironically, might find themselves in sympathy with the faithful, recognizing that faith, however misguided, has been the glue that held the Imperium together in the absence of any other unifying force. The tension between faith and reason, between the ecclesiarchy and the Primarchs, would become the defining internal conflict of the new Imperium. Spiritually, yet the return of all the Primarchs would represent something that has not been seen since the dawn of the Great Crusade: the full realization of the Emperor's vision. Not just the military vision, but the deeper, more mysterious purpose that the Emperor never fully revealed to anyone. The Primarchs were created to be more than generals. They were keys, each one embodying a different aspect of the Emperor's nature. Together, they represent the totality of his design, but the complete expression of what he intended humanity to become. And this is where the story reaches its ultimate conclusion. The Emperor's endgame. The Golden Throne is failing. Everyone knows it. The Mechanicus has been desperately trying to repair it for millennia, but the technology is beyond their understanding. The webway rift beneath the throne is growing, threatening to swallow Terra and the entire Sol system. The Emperor's psychic light, the astronomicon that guides Imperial ships through the warp, is flickering. Humanity is running out of time, but the return of all 20 Primarchs, loyal and traitor alike, might represent the final piece of a puzzle that has been 10,000 years in the solving. The Emperor created his sons for a reason. He scattered them across the galaxy for a reason. He fought the heresy, sat upon the throne, and endured 10 millennia of living death for a reason. And perhaps that reason was always this: to bring them all back together at the moment of greatest need, to assemble the keys that unlock whatever door stands between humanity and its destiny. We cannot know what lies on the other side of that door. The lore of Warhammer 40,000 is deliberately vague about the Emperor's ultimate plan, and rightly so. The mystery is part of the magic, but we can imagine. We can picture a moment when all 20 Primarchs stand before the Golden Throne, a loyal and traitor alike, bound together by the irresistible pull of their father's will. A moment when the Emperor's psychic presence, channeled through the combined genetic legacy of all his sons, blazes with a brilliance that has not been seen since the day he walked among mortals. And in that moment, the galaxy holds its breath. The great rift flickers, its roiling energies disturbed by a force they cannot comprehend. The Chaos Gods pause in their eternal game, sensing something that even they cannot predict. The Eldari seers look up from their runestones, their eyes wide with a hope they have not felt in 60 million years. The tyrannid hive mind recoils, sensing a psychic presence so vast that even its immeasurable hunger is momentarily overwhelmed. The Necron lords, ancient beyond measure, feel something stir in the empty spaces where their souls used to be. And across the Imperium, on a billion worlds, in a trillion hearts, and ordinary men and women who have known nothing but darkness and fear look up at the sky and see, for the first time in their lives, a light that does not come from stars. We should also address the great mystery that hangs over the entire Primarch narrative, the lost Primarchs, the 2nd and the 11th. Two of the Emperor's sons whose names were erased from history, whose legions were dissolved, whose very existence was made into a forbidden subject that even the other Primarchs refused to discuss. What happened to them? Why were they erased? And if all the Primarchs are returning, does that include them? The lore is deliberately vague on this point, and that is by design. Games Workshop has stated that the lost Primarchs will likely never be fully revealed, because their mystery serves a narrative purpose that outweighs any specific story that could be told about them. That they represent the unknown, the possibility that even the Emperor's grand design contained failures that he chose to hide rather than confront. The Space Wolves, it is hinted, may have been involved in the destruction or pacification of one or both of the lost legions, serving as the Emperor's executioners in a role that would later be called upon again during the burning of Prospero. But in a scenario where all the Primarchs return, the lost Primarchs add a fascinating wildcard. If they were killed, they would be among the dead who might be brought back by extraordinary means. If they were imprisoned somewhere, their return could reveal secrets about the Emperor's true nature and intentions that would shock even the other Primarchs. And if they were corrupted by something worse than chaos, something so terrible that the Emperor himself chose to erase all record of their existence rather than let the truth be known, or if their return could represent a threat that makes even the demon Primarchs look tame by comparison. The beauty of the lost Primarchs is that they can be anything. They are the blank spaces in the story, the doors that have never been opened, the questions that have never been answered. And in a narrative about the return of all the Primarchs, they represent the ultimate unknown, the final card in a deck that has already produced more than enough surprises. But let us return to the scenario we have been building. The grand convergence of all the Emperor's sons upon Terra and the galaxy at large. We have talked about the military implications, the political upheaval, the spiritual transformation. But we have not yet talked about the most important thing of all, the personal cost. The Primarchs are not robots. They are not weapons that can be pointed at a target and told to fire. They are beings with emotions, with memories, and with the capacity for love and grief and rage and hope. And the return of all 18 known Primarchs would force each one of them to confront the full weight of everything they have lost. Guilliman would have to face the brothers he failed to save. He would look into the eyes of Sanguinius if the great angel returned, and remember the moment when he learned that his golden brother had died while he was still trying to break through the ruin storm. Yet he would see Ferrus Manus and remember the reports of the drop site massacre, the horror of learning that 4 of his brothers had turned traitor, and 3 of his loyal brothers had been killed in a single day of betrayal. He would face Dawn and remember the bitter arguments they had about the Codex Astartes, the shouting matches that drove a wedge between 2 men who should have been the closest of allies. Russ would have to face Magnus, not in battle, though battle would certainly come, but in the quiet spaces between the fighting, in the moments of reflection that even the Wolf King cannot avoid forever. Russ burned Prospero. He destroyed Magnus's libraries, killed his sons, and drove the Crimson King into the arms of Sinch. He did it because the Emperor told him to, and because Russ believed it was the right thing to do. But 10,000 years of fighting in the Eye of Terror, surrounded by the consequences of the heresy, would have given even Russ pause. Would he still believe he was right? Would he still defend the burning of Prospero? Or would he look at Magnus, at the broken, twisted thing his brother has become, and wonder if there was a moment, a single moment, when a different choice could have changed everything? The Khan would have to reckon with a galaxy that moved on without him. For 10,000 years, the White Scars have maintained their traditions, their speed, their independence, in honor of their missing Primarch. But they have also changed, evolving in ways that the Khan could never have predicted. The Primaris Space Marines, the new Codex-compliant organization of the chapters, the political realities of serving an Imperium ruled by Guilliman. The Khan left a legion and would return to a chapter. He left a galaxy that was being conquered and would return to one that was being consumed. The adjustment would be difficult for a being who values freedom above all things, and who now finds himself bound by obligations and alliances that he did not choose. Vulcan would have to confront the toll that his immortality has taken on his mind. Being a perpetual means never dying, but it does not mean never suffering. Vulcan has died and been reborn countless times, and each death has left its mark on his psyche. The gentle giant who valued the lives of ordinary humans may find that his capacity for compassion has been eroded by millennia of death and rebirth, and in the struggle to recover that compassion, to remember why it matters, would be the defining challenge of his return, and Corax would have to learn to be human again. 10,000 years in the warp has made him something other than what he was. He is a shadow, a predator, a being of darkness that may no longer be able to walk in the light without causing fear in those around him. The Primarch who fought to liberate slaves and protect the innocent would have to confront the possibility that he has become something that the innocent need protection from. The journey back to humanity, if such a journey is even possible, would be the most difficult challenge Corax has ever faced, and that includes 10 millennia of fighting demons in their own territory. These personal stories are what make the return of the Primarchs so compelling. It is not just about armies and strategies and the fate of empires. It is about people, extraordinary people, inhuman people, demigod people, but people nonetheless. Beings who feel pain and joy and loss and hope, who make mistakes and learn from them, who carry the weight of their choices like scars that never fully heal. The Primarchs are mirrors held up to humanity, reflections of our best qualities and our worst impulses, magnified to a scale that spans galaxies. And their return would force us, the readers and the fans and the dreamers who inhabit this setting, to ask ourselves the same questions they would ask themselves. What have we lost? What can we recover? And is it worth the cost? That is the story of what happens when all the Primarchs finally return at once, Not just war, although there would be war on a scale that makes the Horus heresy look like a border skirmish. Not just politics, as although the political upheaval would reshape every institution in the Imperium. Not just strategy, although the strategic implications would alter the balance of power in the galaxy forever. It means hope. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, where the dead cry out for vengeance and the living pray for a death that will not come, the return of the Emperor's sons is the one thing that could change everything. And not because the Primarchs are perfect, because they are not. Not because they have all the answers, because they do not. But because they are proof that even in the darkest hour, even when all seems lost, the story is not over. The heroes can come back. The dawn can break. The galaxy can be saved. Whether it will be saved is another question entirely. The Primarchs are as flawed as they are powerful, and their return would bring not just strength, but also all the rivalries, grudges, and personal demons that drove them apart in the first place. The heresy happened because the Emperor's sons were unable to set aside their differences and work together. If they repeat those mistakes, the consequences would be catastrophic. But they have something now that they did not have before. They have 10,000 years of hindsight. They have the knowledge of what their failures cost the galaxy. They have seen the consequences of their choices, as played out across millennia and written in the blood of billions. And perhaps, just perhaps, that knowledge will be enough to make them choose differently this time. The sarcophagus stands empty now, in the halls of remembrance. The weapons are silent, the systems dark. But the message lives on, a testament to the power of choice and the endurance of the human spirit. For those who have ears to hear and eyes to see, it serves as both warning and inspiration. Just a reminder that we are more than the weapons we wield or the wars we fight. We are the choices we make, the bonds we preserve, the hope we refuse to surrender, no matter how dark the path before us becomes. The Primarchs are coming home, all of them, and when they arrive, the galaxy will never be the same. That is the story of what happens when all the Primarchs finally return at once. A story of war and brotherhood, of tragedy and hope, of sons and fathers and the choices that define us all. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about this story is that it is not finished. It will never be finished. That is the genius of Warhammer 40,000 as a setting. It is not a single narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. It is a living, breathing universe that grows and changes with every novel, every codex, every game played on a tabletop somewhere in the world. The return of the Primarchs is happening, slowly, one by one. And each return adds a new layer of complexity to a story that is already more rich and more detailed than most entire fictional universes combined. Guilliman is back, shouldering the burden of an empire that is crumbling under its own weight. The Lion is back, hunting the enemies of the Emperor with the single-minded focus of a knight on a holy quest. Fulgrim has returned in his daemonic glory, bringing the full weight of Slaanesh's excess to the battlefield. And somewhere out there, and in the Eye of Terror and the Webway and the volcanic forges of forgotten worlds, the other sons of the Emperor are waiting, watching, preparing. The current state of the tabletop game reflects this gradual return. With Fulgrim's release in 2025, alongside the Emperor's Children Codex, all 4 of the major Daemon Primarchs now have dedicated armies and models. Magnus the Red for the Thousand Sons, Mortarion for the Death Guard, Angron for the World Eaters, and Fulgrim for the Emperor's Children. On the Loyalist side, Guilliman leads the Space Marines and the Lion commands the Dark Angels. The stage is set for more returns, and the community has been buzzing with speculation about who will be next. Will Leman Russ emerge from the Eye of Terror to even the odds? Will Vulcan prove that his perpetual nature makes him the ultimate survivor? Will the Khan ride out of the Webway at the head of a cavalry charge that spans sectors? The answers to these questions will come in time. Games Workshop has proven with the returns of Guilliman and the Lion that they can bring Primarchs back in ways that are narratively satisfying, emotionally resonant, and commercially spectacular. Each return is an event, a moment that reshapes the setting and gives players new stories to tell on the tabletop. And as more Primarchs return, the possibilities for narrative conflict and cooperation multiply exponentially. Consider just one possibility: a civil war among the loyal Primarchs. It happened before, after all. The arguments over the Codex Astartes nearly tore the Imperium apart in the aftermath of the heresy. What if the returning Primarchs cannot agree on how to save the Imperium? What if Guilliman's pragmatic reformism clashes with the Lion's absolute devotion to duty, or Russ's wild independence, or Dawn's inflexible adherence to principle? The Imperium has survived 10,000 years of external threats. Could it survive the internal pressures of having 9 demigods, and each with their own vision for humanity's future, all trying to steer the ship at the same time? Or consider the opposite: a united Imperium, led by all 9 loyal Primarchs, launching a crusade of such magnitude that it dwarfs the original Great Crusade. Not just reclaiming lost worlds, but actively pushing back the borders of the Imperium, closing the Great Rift, cleansing the Eye of Terror, and hunting down the demon Primarchs in their own territory. A war of liberation that takes the fight to chaos for the first time in 10,000 years, rather than simply reacting to each new incursion. Or consider the most terrifying possibility of all. The return of the Primarchs is itself part of a chaos scheme. What if the Chaos Gods want the Primarchs to return? What if they have been manipulating events for 10,000 years, engineering the conditions under which all the Emperor's sons would be forced to reassemble? Thus, what if the reunion itself is the trigger for some greater catastrophe, some cosmic event that the Chaos Gods have been planning since before the heresy in the Warhammer 40,000 universe? Hope is always a double-edged sword, and the things that seem like salvation have a way of becoming instruments of damnation. These are the questions that make this setting so endlessly compelling. There are no easy answers, no clean resolutions, no fairy tale endings. Yet there is only the eternal struggle between light and darkness, between hope and despair, between the stubborn refusal to give up and the vast crushing weight of a galaxy that seems designed to destroy everything good and noble and true. But there is also this: in 10,000 years of darkness, the Imperium has not fallen. In 10,000 years of war, humanity has not been extinguished. In 10,000 years of suffering, the light of the Emperor has not gone out. And now, one by one, the sons of that Emperor are beginning to return. Not because anyone forced them to, not because some grand design compelled them, but because, in the end, that is what brothers do. They come home. The wars that lie ahead will be the greatest the galaxy has ever seen. The battles will be fought on scales that defy comprehension, across millions of worlds, involving forces so vast that the mind cannot contain them. The cost will be measured in lives beyond counting, yet in suffering beyond description, in sacrifices that will echo through eternity. And at the center of it all, standing against the darkness with nothing but their strength and their will, and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood, will be the Primarchs. All of them, together at last. Whatever happens next, the galaxy will never be the same. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most fascinating scenarios in Warhammer 40,000 lore, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to Q on 40,000. Every subscription helps this channel grow and allows me to create more content like this for you. And if you have thoughts on which Primarch you most want to see return, or how you think the galaxy would change if all of them came back at once, leave a comment below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your theories and ideas. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is always hope, even if you have to fight for it.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.